So you want to watch ReZero, huh? Well, let me just tell you, you're about to get into a whole mountain of pain. This series will be nothing but pain and suffering, and not because it's bad. Before I got into this show, I had no idea what to expect out of it. My experience with the Isekai genre hadn't been all that fantastic, with the exception of Konosuba. Well, that and Shield Hero Season 1. But the moment I actually opened up an episode and began to watch, I realized, oh crap, this is going to be one hell of a trip, isn't it? ReZero, Starting Life in a New World, is a brutal emotional experience disguising itself as a happy, upbeat fantasy series. Large portions of the series consist of watching the characters you come to know and love die the most gruesome deaths repeatedly, along with having to face murdering their own friends because there's no other way around an obstacle. If ever there was a show to toy with your emotions and make you feel bad just because it can, ReZero is that show. And I am 100% there for it. So if you're a sucker for pain like I am and enjoy really dark and messed up stories, you will love this one. Okay, it's not as dark and twisted as I'm making it sound. The story arcs tend to end happily, but the journey there is wrought with brutal decision making and heartbreaking failures. The only caveat to that is the fact that it all hinges on you being able to sympathize with the main character, and there seems to be quite a bit of division around that aspect of the series. But I'll get to him in a moment. I'm going to lay out some general observations of the story first. ReZero is a story about a high school boy named Subaru Natsuki who is suddenly and mysteriously abducted from his world and plopped down in the middle of a fantasy world. Now, that's pretty stereotypical isekai bullshit right there, and there's really no reason to go over it anymore. The only difference between Subaru and your normal isekai protagonist is that Subaru is not given any special powers that make him some great hero. Or at least, it seems that way at first. Subaru quickly finds out in the most gruesome way possible that he has the ability to defy time. His death triggers a loop that sends him back in time to relive the series of events that led to his death. And he'll continue to live out those events until he comes to a resolution he can accept. This has got to be one of the most broken powers in anime history, and its only drawback is that he can't tell anyone about it. He can't even tell people what's going to happen to them or try to warn them of the events that are coming. And so begins his adventure. He's forced to relive the events of his first day in this world multiple times in order to save a girl named Amelia, who helped him during the first loop. And from that point forward, after succeeding in breaking that chain of events, he gets dragged into worse and worse situations. He has to deal with shamans who can control powerful monsters. He has to deal with the ramifications of his own fuck-ups in the capital of the country. He has to deal with an attack from the witches cult that coincides with the appearance of a powerful monster called the White Whale. And then immediately after that has to deal with the schemes of a certain noble who has been manipulating things since the beginning. And if you're up to date with the novel series, you'll be aware that they're currently in the middle of the Watergate City arc, where the witches cult has launched a full-on attack on the city and is placing demands on everyone there in order to get something. One of the things I really have to commend this series for is having so many characters that I can actually remember and that feel incredibly unique. The cast is generally female-centric, with one lady controlling each of 5 factions. And that's centered around the idea of this royal selection where they're trying to find a new leader for the country. Why specifically it has to be women other than the plot point? I don't know. But each character is unique and is motivated by their own set of ideals and reasons and desires to gain control of this country. And all of them feel really well written in their own right. Amelia ends up being the pure-hearted and kind one who only wants to make things better. Crush, or Crochet, or however you're supposed to pronounce that, is very practical and level-headed, making her the ideal leader of the group. Anastasia Hoshin proves to be another good leader candidate. She's level-headed and cunning, but also greedy and exploitative. Priscilla represents the old guard nobles. She's full of herself, egotistical, and entitled. And Felt is a thief girl who magically ends up on the selection because things happen in the plot. She's more the revolutionary type, looking to make the lives of the people down in the gutter better at the expense of the nobles who are hogging everything. And each one comes equipped with their own personality. Amelia is gentle, Cruce is proper, Anastasia is manipulative, Priscilla is self-centered, and Felt is ill-mannered and rough around the edges. In spite of the story being centered around these women, it's not like the male characters of the series suffer because of it like you would see in most Western productions. Reinhardt and Wilhelm van Estrella are still awesome characters who are total badasses. Subaru, Otto, and Garfield are also very fun, and they make up part of the main cast in the later section of the series, with Otto being the least developed of them. And the villains are great too. And this is the point at which we get into the witches cult. With 6, technically 7, archbishops of the witches cult, there's quite a bit of material there to work through. Each bishop represents one of the 7 deadly sins, and the first one you come across is sloth. Pelagius Romnicanti is a madman, but he has this ridiculous ability called the unseen hand that allows him to reach out invisible limbs to affect whatever he can see. He can strangle, break bones, throw people away, and even deflect attacks, and the fact that most normal people can't see them makes them a huge problem to deal with. And there's the issue of Betelgeuse being able to possess the bodies of other people. The only other archbishops you'll meet in the anime are the Archbishop of Gluttony and the Archbishop of Greed, and even their brief appearance plays a major role in the story. These aren't just characters that are flaunted in our faces to make us be like, ooh, what's going on? They come in, they mess a bunch of stuff up, and then they leave for the next arc. Honestly, the fact that Re:Zero can have so many well-rounded characters that are useful to the plot is impressive. I mean, hell, look at Naruto, and with like half of Naruto's classmates being entirely irrelevant to the story. So Re:Zero has a great cast, but even the story is good. It starts off as a story about some political tension rising as the old leaders of the nation have died off and now the country is in need of new leadership. And this is done through the royal selection, in which 5 people are selected to be the potential leader of the nation, and everyone in the country gets to decide who they want to lead them. And with that being the overarching driving event for a lot of what happens in the series, there are also the issues of problems plaguing the nation. There's the nefarious witches cult, which is full of psychotic murderers. There are internal power struggles and people's own personal motivations for being involved with this political process. And there are long-standing threats, such as the white whale that was mentioned earlier, that become part of the plot of the series. Of course, all these events start to happen after the mysterious appearance of Subaru Natsuki in this world. And what a great way to segue into dissecting the main character of the series. As I mentioned earlier, Subaru Natsuki has the ability to repeat the actions that led to his death. Now, he calls this power return by death, but I have some reason to believe that it's actually the authority of pride, which is important because authorities are powers held only by the archbishops of the witches cult. Regardless of that power, Subaru himself is physically unimpressive. He's not absolutely hopeless in a fight, but he's no trained knight like Reinhardt or Julius, and he's definitely not a magic user like Amelia. The unfortunate case of Subaru Natsuki is that his only overpowered ability is the fact that he cannot actually be killed. But that actually makes the series more compelling. You actually get to watch this guy struggle through a lot of events and a lot of his own personal flaws. Subaru is very arrogant and full of himself. And I know some people find that incredibly annoying and a huge turnoff for the character. But after understanding his motivations a little bit better after the second season and after reading further in the novels, I find myself actually able to sympathize with him because he does have some good points. He's someone willing to lay down his life and do whatever it takes to save the people around him, which may not come off as very impressive considering he can just relive those events. But keep in mind, this dude is watching everyone he cares about get murdered over and over and over again. And there's the question of whether that timeline is actually erased or whether it continues going after his death. And the big turning point in his character is shortly after the second arc. He makes a huge fool of himself because of his own arrogance. And the scene is honestly hard to watch because I got secondhand embarrassed and just cringed through the whole thing. But after having to put up with the consequences of his own arrogance and pride and having to deal with the ramifications of his actions, he begins to actually change himself. I'd argue Subaru Natsuki is actually a very heroic character. And he's a character who relies upon trial and error to get through all his struggles, which is one of the things that I feel like makes him very relatable. He goes through hell over and over and over again just to achieve the result he wants. And he doesn't remain indefinitely the loser of all time. He gets some new powers. Particularly, he absorbs the authority of sloth. Now, that proves to be incompatible with him, but it still gives him some utility. But Subaru's greatest ability is being able to rally everyone to a cause. In the middle of the royal selection, just after embarrassing himself in front of the entire nation, Subaru manages to rally a bunch of political rivals all to the same cause just so he can save Amelia's life. Gaining the combined backing of Anastasia Hoshin and Lady Cruce, he's able to help defeat not only the White Whale, but the Witch's Cult led by the Archbishop of Sloth. But even then, it still takes him a couple of attempts after getting that support to finally achieve his total victory. And hell, Subaru's struggle with his own self-worth and self-image is one of the things that made me really like him. He grew up in the shadow of his father. Now, whether his father is a bad person or not, it's never really stated. He directs that energy more towards everyone outside his family, blaming them for having such high expectations of him, and the fact that he feels like a failure for not living up to those expectations. And I personally found it a little bit touching that someone so proud and arrogant would struggle with their own self-image so much. To sum it up, Subaru's development, both in his abilities and in his personality, are critical to this series. And that's why so many of the big moments can hurt so much. It's particularly after the first arc of the series. There are moments in the second arc where Subaru is dealing with the shaman that just seem brutal. I mean, there's one where he finds out that one of the servant girls he thought trusted him had actually been responsible for his death a couple of times in that loop. And that ended up being a kind of heartbreaking moment. The redemption comes later when he then has to save her from her own fury-induced rampage, as she tries to save his life from the shaman's curse by destroying all the monsters that she had summoned to the area. Then, in the third arc, there's his failure to save everyone in Roswell's mansion. And not just once, multiple times. He arrives too late on several occasions only to find an entire field of dead bodies, villages wiped out, everyone working at the mansion slaughtered. There was also that time where he accidentally killed Amelia by telling her about his powers. There's also that time during that third arc where Felix has to kill him because Betelgeuse has possessed him. Moving on to season 2, you have the Sanctuary arc. And during that, one of the best moments of the series was when Subaru meets his parents again. Or at least a recreation of his parents based off of his memories. But that's the moment where Subaru finally gets to confront some of his past griefs and some of his past mistakes. And another great moment that blew up across the internet and is why I initially saw this series was right in the middle of that final arc of season 1, where Subaru is considering giving up because he can't save anyone no matter how hard he tries. And in the middle of all that, best girl Rem confesses to him the fact that she is totally in love with him. And on top of that, encourages him to never give up and constantly keep fighting because that's why she fell in love with him. Too bad this dude is a fucking simp for Amelia though. I really just can't stress enough how much I loved this series. The writing generally feels so airtight, I can't really find any complaints. And even though I want to complain about that scene in the Capitol where I got secondhand embarrassment and curled up in my chair listening to it, that was the point of the scene, so I can't complain about it. And when I consider the way Tape Nagatsky likes to write, the way he stated in one of the afterwords of his book, how he likes to build everything up to a high and then tear it all down and drop it back down to the bottom just to build it all the way back up again for the end of the story. A lot of the things that happen across this show start to really make sense. I personally feel like ReZero, starting life in a new world, is a must-watch when it comes to isekai anime. It is one of a handful of series that I just can't get enough of. It's got a 9.5 out of 10 in my book. And with that, we've reached the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you liked this commentary. And if you did, leave a like, subscribe, maybe share this with a few people who might be interested. See you next time when I dive into Tokyo Revengers.